Okay, so probably should be popping up there in just a second. There we go. Yeah, it's loading up there. Okay, well, now I'm going to pause that because the delay will drive me nuts trying to watch myself in two places at once.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Chris, and I am Carl. And so we'll do a quick little intro here, but I'm decided to name this thing "Leaving Leviticus." And Chris and I have been talking for some time now. For how long's it been now? Like well over
A
maybe
little over a
2
month,
months.
yeah.
Yeah, getting on there. And we've really enjoyed our chats, and I think we've explored a lot of truths and dug out a lot of cool things out of the Bible. And my perspective is coming from the full ride of militant atheism all the way up to Christianity. And I've got some news for you, Chris. I believe.
All right.
I think you had figured that out, but yeah, I had been kind of waffling, and it hit me hard this last week. I'm like, without faith, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and a lot of the strength comes from the really, really big, strong faith part. So yeah, I took communion, and then it was almost like doing that act on Sunday, because I went to 2 different services on Sunday, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Doing that act really hit me. Well, I guess it was performing the action that made me start to think about things even more. And then this morning in the shower, I was like it was hitting me big in the heart, and just a massive, I don't know, scary understanding almost. It was really wild. I never thought I'd experience something like that before or ever. So yeah, I'm really happy. It's fantastic. Never would have thought. So there's my news. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this game, and oh, hey, this is one of my former students. Hey, yeah, remember so we're going to talk about a few biblical passages here in a little bit. So we're just getting started. The stream's about my passage from atheism back into Christianity. And Chris and I are going to talk a little bit and bounce some ideas off each other's heads, because we really enjoy the conversation. Everybody's welcome to watch and learn and see what they can get out of it. So here's what I wanted to do. This is my understanding of your background, and you can correct me where I'm wrong. And then I kind of want you to do the same with me. That way we can definitely know where we're both coming from, Chris.
Okay.
My understanding of you is that you're in a small town that's fairly evangelical. You've always been Christian? You were born and raised Christian?
I was raised in a Christian family, yeah.
And you're Lutheran?
I have definite Lutheran sympathies,
Okay.
but I'm currently in an Episcopal church.
Oh, right, that's right. You're in an Episcopal church. Okay, and I've been just kind of searching around all over here and there, checking out the different churches around, trying to figure out what I am, because I don't know what I'm up to. So I'm asking God, and He's had some pretty good insights for me, I think. All right. So, did you ever have any doubts in your faith, or was it always pretty rock solid for you?
Oh, sure. I've had doubts. But most of those came, I mean, not that I'm that old, but later, not as I was growing. I mean, I watched a lot of my friends in high school have serious doubts, and that was really disconcerting to me, because we had all grown up together in church, and I didn't like seeing them struggle like that. But I went through stuff that, I mean, I won't get into the details of it, but that rocked my faith later on. And so, no, I can't say that it's been calm seas the whole time.
Right. Sure. Well, okay. Well, that's I think that's good to hear, because I think that's kind of the point. We're not born into calm blue oceans, and how do we deal with the chaos that gets thrown at us? Because life is pretty rough, and so I think that anything that gets tested it does tend to end up being stronger if you come out with some version of it that's intact. And my faith has hit me like a ton of bricks, because I had felt really, I guess, well, it wasn't that I was feeling empty as an atheist. It was the ignoring the whatever it was in the back of my head, my subconscious, God, whatever you want to call it, trying to get my attention. And the attention was getting louder and louder, and it was making me more listless and less comfortable in my own skin, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I lost, when I was informed that I wasn't going to be teaching at the school that I taught at for the next year, I decided to quit, because I had to go figure out why I was doing my job poor in a way that wasn't demonstrating value easily to everyone else. Was it just circumstance, or was I actually doing it to myself? And I think the answer was a little bit of both. But mainly the answer I got from this self-exploration journey was that there was something I was really ignoring. And as I started to go dig deep into my soul, so to speak, I found that answer was, I had a big calling. That calling was going to be from God, and God was trying to tell me exactly what I needed to be doing with my life, and I wasn't going to be happy until I paid attention. And the shift that happened was from, I was really, really excited about the school that I was going to teach at. And now with my knowledge of, I'm not a fan of anything that the government is plugged into. And so I think, one, I felt like I was supporting something that I didn't really believe in, and that was eating at me. Two, I was having to do it in a way that I thought was toxic to children, because I don't like teaching in large classrooms. I think it's unhealthy for them. I think it keeps them from growing in the most productive way. Mm-hmm. And three, I really thought I had an answer to that in some way, but I was too scared, cowardly, fearful to go for it. And so I would drown the pain in alcohol. And that would really make it so that I could, I don't know, get through the next day was the right thing, but it was purposeless. And that was the deal. I wasn't getting any real meaning. And there's something that happens when, at least this is true for me, when I connected to God, that it allowed me to listen to whatever that's, if it's the subconscious part of your mind, if that's the part that talks to God, if that's us, whatever's divine in us, I'm still not sure, and I'm pretty much convinced that it doesn't really matter too much how you think about it, because if God's infinite, then it's going to be a really moot point. The point is whether you have access to this divine source is like the best way that I can articulate it right now. Well, that's all kind of vague, and I don't want to get too specific on it, but just to give everybody a sort of a shout from where I'm coming from, because this is all new to me, and you've had a lot of time to wrestle and struggle and explore faith. So let me be quiet for a minute, and you tell me about, like, because you've talked about Klein before, and you run a podcast. Why don't you say a little bit about that?
Sure. Let me explain why Klein is so important to me. So, the kind of church that I grew up in is what I guess we would call broadly evangelical. It was Trinity Bible Church, and they had a statement of faith that might get trotted out when they were doing a new members class or something, but what we believed wasn't really emphasized. So lots of different things could float to the surface depending on who was in the pulpit, depending on who was teaching the Sunday school class. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I learned all of the Bible stories growing up in Sunday school, but none of them had anything to do with each other. They were all just discrete little stories. And it wasn't until I was sitting in Meredith's Meredith Klein's class in seminary that all of a sudden, all of those stories became one unified whole, and it was all about Jesus. And the light bulb went on for me, and I got super excited about that. And so now, Klein died in 2007, but some other students of his and I decided that it was time to do a podcast because people all over the world can discover that. And sure enough, I mean, I really did think that it was just going to be 50 of our Facebook friends listening to this thing, but
right.
We've got 62 countries around the world and closing in on 100,000 downloads. So,
wow, very nice. Yeah, so you really found a nice little niche, and you're still growing it. So that's outstanding. I'm glad to hear your success, and that's really good because that means that people are out there hungry for something that's not being provided, and you found at least a good toehold into that. So that's excellent. I'm really excited about that. I think the neat thing about our connection, and the first part of this episode will be really dry. I promise it's going to get really, really interesting later, guys. Hang on. The Logos is coming. I've got some great stuff to talk about. But just to set our groundwork real firmly, so I like that you're coming from that perspective. I'm coming from like the more empiricist, then through Jordan Peterson, and then into the Bible, and from a psychological perspective. And I think this is going to be a really cool synthesis of us being able to speak our version of the truth and really get a lot out of it. And hopefully other people will too. And if nothing else, these recordings will be up for, well, until YouTube blows up. So hopefully a long time. And I'm hoping they'll be meaningful. So,
yeah, looking forward to it.
All right. So we're going to call this episode 1, and we're going to keep them pretty conversational. The fundamentals that I want to really deal with is, well, kind of my perspective of where I came from, because I think this is a problem that needs to be addressed in the world. And that's as we are becoming more and more secular, and more people are seeing no reason to believe in something greater than themselves or what humans by themselves can accomplish, there's something we're missing, and there's a danger growing. And what I mean by that is, well, I keep coming back to the idea of the story of the Tower of Babel. And when you place man at the top of the hierarchical structure of belief and views and your ultimate philosophy of the world, I think that's what the story of the Tower of Babel is. God comes and scatters humanity to the four winds for trying to build something that is not on steady ground, not able to reach heaven. And then we have to, and in order to actually find the thing that is going to be able to do that, we can't do it in our time. This is not a biological time thing. This is not a human time thing. You got to do it in God's time. And that's like greater and huger than we can ever imagine. I mean, because what's the goal here? Well, my understanding is our efforts and our beliefs and our good nature and the light that we shine on the world is in order to create the kingdom of heaven here on earth. And that gives you meaning and purpose. And you do that by speaking the truth as much as you can and taking action in the world in a way that benefits other people and causes the least amount of suffering possible. That's pretty succinct. I think there's about as close as I can get it off the top of my head. But that's the general philosophy that I'm working from. What do you feel when you're? Why is there? I mean, that's sort of meaning of life-ish.
Yeah, and I'm glad that's really the kind of thing that we're going to be wrestling with as we talk. I think, well, I really like that you took it back to the Tower of Babel, however you want to say it. I think that there are some some real parallels to where we are today. And I think a lot of those come from the place that you've come from, Carl. I mean, I think that modernism really had this huge confidence in the ability of science and human reason to conquer everything. I mean, there was nothing that we couldn't do with science and human reason. And those are great tools. I'm not wanting to denigrate those things at all.
I feel the same way. It's just, but what do you do with all that, right? Because so many people seem to be wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater is a phrase I seem to be hearing more and more and more these days.
Yeah, I mean, the question really is, for what? I mean, if science is helping us live longer, is that, I mean, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? Because it seems like a lot of people are really unhappy with life. So science makes it last longer. Right. So what, you get to be unhappy longer?
Right. Right. No, that's a really good point. So we better figure out what we're doing with this time here, right?
So there's that.
Because you could be miserable for a really long time.
Right. Yeah. Transhumanists think that they're going to create some synthesis between humanity and machine and live forever.
I don't know about the live forever part, but I think that definitely longer lifespans are coming and stuff that we're going to put inside of us to make us, well, greater than we are. So yeah, I can see that. Well, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, continue with that thought.
No, I think the question of meaning really hasn't been addressed by modernists. And now that postmodernism is here, meaning is just kind of thrown out the window. It's like there's Carl's meaning, there's Chris's meaning, and everyone else who's listening has their meaning. Which, if that's the case, why does that even matter? Right. I want there to be some objective meaning that I can sink my teeth into. Otherwise, it's like living in the Matrix, and it's still, we're back to meaninglessness. I think that's the way I see it. And I believe that the kingdom of God is real, but I think that that's something that God brings about when he's ready, not something that we can build. And so let me just take that back to the Tower of Babel for a minute. I think the Tower of Babel is an expression of what humans want to do with religion ever since Adam and Eve decided to rebel against God. Every religion in the world will give you a set of ethical principles and say, go to it. Only Christianity is unique in that it says you can't do it. And you can't do it because Adam messed it up for all of us. We're all bent toward rebellion against God because of Adam. So no matter how great the ethical principles are, you're born inclined to break those principles. And so we need God rather than building a tower that we can ascend up to God. We need God to come down to us. And that's the message of Christianity, is that in Jesus Christ, he has.
Yes. And I really enjoyed the, reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and from this new perspective of being able to dig and dig and dig and get new meaning out of it every single time that I do. With the message being, well, here's how you act. And the more you act this way, not only are you doing good, but you feel a lot better. At least that's been true for me. I mean, because I went from, well, I kind of did it concurrently with struggling with alcohol and wanting to get over that, and wanting to understand myself as fully as possible. And then the God thing just sort of happened. I hate to put it that way, but the God thing just sort of happened. But that was the answer that I was led to, because I don't think it's something that you can force.
Right.
And I think that's by design. I'm not sure if that's the word I want to use, but it's something like that. Because if you force it, it's like something pushes against you, and God wants you to walk freely and openly to Him. So, and I think that in order that by doing that, you end up understanding yourself in a really, really open way. So what I mean by that is, when I was digging into my own mind and trying to understand myself, I, of course, have been listening to Peterson a lot, but he suggested Carl Rogers, and Carl Rogers' philosophy of how you should become a person is the book that I've listened to most is I think On Becoming a Person. And he says and it's his combination of psychoanalytical theory plus, what can you do for yourself to be able to understand yourself as well as possible. And you have to be open, and you have to pay attention to all your feelings. You can't ignore anything. And if you have an analyst there with you, their job is to mostly just sit there and go, mm-hmm. Ah, yeah, what do you think about that? And like, just let it happen and let the exploration occur. And so I began doing that just by making YouTube videos of myself in a lot of ways, with some of it, and journaling and writing. And because I didn't know what I was going to write until I wrote it. And because I guess I took the journey on with an understanding that it was going somewhere important, but I didn't know where, and I wouldn't know where until I decided to take the journey by doing the work of not lying to myself in particular. And so Rule 8 in Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, which is tell the truth or at least don't lie, was really, really key, because what I found was that I would meet somebody new after I'd begun this journey. I would tell them the complete and open and honest truth and see what happened, and went, oh God, don't hurt me for saying that. and it turned out okay, because we lie to each other so much, and we try to protect each other, and we want to put on this good face, and all this stuff that we hide behind. And I think we have this innate or possibly spark of the divine sense inside of us that allows us to really understand when another person has dropped the BS and is really telling us what they believe, especially when they're talking about themselves. That was my experience anyways. Here, let me tell you about me. Here's my story. And a lot of this happened slowly because I was going to AA meetings where you can actually do that, and you do it in front of a bunch of people, and they nod and go, I understand that completely. And then you really get something special out of it. And then when you do that one-on-one, you share, they share, and something new and great comes out of that. And you end up with something that is unachievable in any other way. And as I began to understand that more, and then I read John 1:1, with God being the Word, that really sunk it home for me. And so here we are, because we did John 3:16 last time, and really made that contrast between, well, here's your solution for nihilism, and this is what shines the light of the world, and Jesus does that. Well, you speaking the word of God, which is the truth, in as clear a shape as you can, because, well, I think about it this way: you can't, if you're lying to yourself, you cripple the part of you that allows you access to God, and He can't talk to you very well when you do that, because He's truth, and you've put up a shield between yourself and God. And as you begin to tell the truth to others and to yourself, that wall comes down, and God's able to talk to you more and more and more clearly. And then you get, what's been true for me is that I get epiphanies, rushes of ideas things that I'm like, wow, I could talk about that forever. And it's just fantastic. I think if I had to explain it on a psychological level, it would be something like, if the right hemisphere of the brain is that which is non-focused and is constantly gathering information from everything, that would be something close to the infinity of God. And whether that's a signal to him or if that's something that's reproduced inside of us, I don't think it really matters, because it's really important and it's really, really true. And the more you are able to listen to that side of yourself, which to me seems connected to God, the better your compass is oriented with how to live life in this world, and the more good stuff happens for you. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and what this has done for my life, and why now I've not just made the leap from saying, well, I'm not a militant atheist anymore, or an atheist at all, or even agnostic, or any of that other stuff. I'm a Christian. And I realized that the missing point to make that last leap was faith. And you need faith, like I need faith really badly, because you can't access God fully without faith. If you really want to hear him and understand things in his way, which is, I'd been thinking, So Ben says the Holy Spirit. This is your road to him, your connection to him, your ability to really hear him. And the more faith you have, the more you're able to it's either tapping that side of your brain or that part of your brain that's connected to the divine, and it really doesn't matter which one that is. And if you really believe, then you can believe in things happening in God's time and not your time, not human time, because you need faith to believe that all this stuff that you're doing actually matters. You've got to believe that. Well, yeah, I'll shut up for a little bit. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
See, I think, but I'd love to get your take on this. I think that atheists need faith too.
Yeah, they do. Because well, here's what I had faith in as an atheist. My strong belief was, well, I had a fear, first of all. The fear was fundamental religious belief stagnates human growth. It blocks the path of science and keeps us from growing into our full potential. And I think that was the big scare tactic that I told myself that made me think, well, okay, well, that means all religion is bad. I must fight against religion. Then somehow, and here's what's wrong with that. I found that anytime you are pitting yourself against the rest of humanity in a way that requires you to use force, you're doing it wrong. So the belief was something like, get rid of all those people, or all of those people, or somehow make them stop believing in religion, then the magical rainbow unicorn power of humanity will blossom and come forth, and we'll all be free. And then when I started to realize how similar that is to every leftist progressive ideology that I hate, because it's like, well, get rid of all the people that are Nazis. Get rid of all the people that are that hate, I don't know, pick your class, right?
Right.
Yeah, whatever progressive cause you've got. Force them to believe that way, and then it just all goes away, and then we're all happy together. And it never works that way. We keep finding something else to focus our attention on. And so if you are approaching the world in a way that makes you think, okay, well, I'm going to force those people to stop what they're doing rather than what are they getting out of it? Why do they believe that way? Then you're definitely approaching the world the wrong way, and you're never gonna climb the mountain by tearing things down. So it's something like that. So sorry, the question was, do atheists have faith? Yeah, absolutely. They have faith that if they just war and rage against religion enough, especially the militant atheists, good stuff happens. And that's one less obstacle that we've removed to the magical power of humans to become whatever that means. So, yeah, there's that.
Yeah, it seems like meaning that we've already talked about is something that they have to have faith in, because I don't know how you can use the scientific method to prove what things mean.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if you ever watched Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris go back and forth at it.
Mm-mm.
They'll go back and forth at it because Peterson will come from the point of view of what's called a priori knowledge, which means the stuff that we see through the filter of how we're built to interact with the world, because the world is a place of doing things, not a static bunch of objects that we can describe, which would be the scientific point of view. If we had a snapshot of the universe at one particular time and we understood exactly how things moved and interact with everything, we could predict the rest of the universe and how it would be forever. And I think that's false. And I used to believe that pretty deeply. And it kind of hurts to believe in, actually, now that I look back on it. I'm like, man, there's no hope in it.
Right. So it seems like in order for them to get up every morning and believe that what they do during the day is worth doing, their family members are worth loving, things like that require faith that there is this thing called meaning, even if what they profess to believe can't account for it. But I mean, then there's also some other philosophical questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? Mm-hmm. And none of us were there when things came to be. So, I mean, even if the atheist account of origins is true, they have to take it on faith as much as the Christian who takes the biblical account at face value.
Yeah, it's something like that, and every atheist you ever talk to will rage against that, and they'll tell you, well, that's faith in something that we can look at, and here's the empirical evidence, and I can show you the math, versus, well, you're just believing in stuff because it's in an old dusty book. And that's about as far as you'll get with that kind of logic and reasoning with an atheist, usually. Or at least that's all I needed.
But I mean, what you just described sounds just as dogmatic,
right,
to me.
Okay, so yeah, I have this absolute belief that I can describe the world with math by making observations, and then I can predict everything. Oh, but we're going to ignore all this stuff that we can't predict yet, and we don't know what it is yet, like dark matter and dark energy, or well, we don't know what that is. We don't know what consciousness is, and there's a lot of things about how we behave that we don't really get. And as I was slowly waking up, I mean, I really like the analogy now, especially now that I'm reading the Bible more, and you have having your eyes opened. Lost the train of thought. I think what I was trying to get at, though, was there's so many unexplained things in science, and the claim of the atheist is, well, look, we're making room for religion smaller and smaller and smaller because there's no place left for it to exist in the realm of things. And their view of religion is, this is what people from a long time ago believed. It was their best explanation of the world. Now we have the scientific method. Get rid of the old ways of explaining things, because, well, we know better and they were dumb. And there's really not much more to it than that.
Right.
We've grown up, and yay for us, even though we had no part of that. And there's like no appreciation for, and as I was going through this journey, I made a few posts in some of the old atheistic forums, like you can see part of it where there's that, it's one of the videos I've got. It's got a clip from Lawrence of Arabia with Sheriff Ali going, "Be patient with him, God," as Lawrence is out trying to tempt fate and tempting God at the same time. Well, so I would post things like, well, okay, just because something is tied to mysticism doesn't mean we want to immediately dismiss it. Oh, yes, it does. I mean, just no thought. I'm like, who's being dogmatic here? Who's possessed by ideology? And what was I scared of in the beginning? The inability to grow. You're showing me your fear by insisting on a worldview that is basically unchangeable. You think that we can throw everything away, and you're assuming this without having explored it yourself, because you've heard other people say it, because you've been told all this stuff about religion and Christianity especially, which is weird. Why Christianity especially? When Islam is doing something just as bad, if not worse. Very few people accept. One thing I really did like about the atheists is they were really upfront in your face that they were not the super ridiculous leftists that would go, "Oh, well, you're Islamophobic." Well, no, they would actually call out the Islam for the horrible acts that extreme Muslims had done, at least that. But why particularly Christianity so much? And so it's almost as if that was the thing that had to fall in order for everything else to come into being. And they're terrified and scared, the atheists are, of lack of forward progress, because fundamental Christians wouldn't want them to explore certain things, like, well, anything to do with say, well, stem cells, for instance, because that has to deal with fetal tissue. And what's the source of fetal tissue? Well, a lot of it comes from aborted fetuses. And so, well, okay, guilt by association, if nothing else there. Well, we won't get into that one. But, it was things like that were brought up over and over again. Oh, well, you're denying global warming, or, whatever the agenda was at the day. Somehow it would always point back to a crazy Christian right-wing fundamentalists, and they were the problem. Get rid of them, and we can do the scientific research, and we'll be just fine. And that was it. Drove me nuts. So I would post things like, well, okay, well, look, have you really thought about why people had mysticism? And here's my answer to that. Because, Christianity wasn't just, well, boom, hey, God decided to give it to us. I believe we had to grow to a state of being able to either one of two ways. And again, this is I don't really care how you get to this conclusion, but you better come to Christianity with some degree of faith if you want to be able to make your way in this world and be productive and help us really build the thing that you're going to be okay with birthing children into. So the road would be, okay, well, either we had to grow up enough in the eyes of God to be worthy of Jesus, and now you can receive the Son of Man and the Son of God and actually get the message and have it do you some good. You're not just so barbaric that it would be a waste of time. Or we grew in a way that enough of us came to the right conclusions about how to live your life in this world that we're born into, to construct this image of God that we could understand, that would preserve and protect us and let us really begin to reduce suffering in the long term through the game of life that would be repeated over and over and over again in this huge cycle, and we'd actually get something out of that as time went on. And then you still come to the fact that, well, okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that God was always there and he said, okay, well, now you're ready? Or does that mean that we are growing to know God? And we don't know what God is. I mean, we have our best understanding of him so far through the scriptures and the texts. And I think, and again, so this now that you know about my fundamental fear for why I was an atheist, it's a really religion's a really tricky thing. It's vital and necessary because it preserves that which makes the life, that especially Christianity makes the world progressively better and reduces suffering and lets you feel good about having children in the world. And because why the hell else would you birth a child into the world that was nothing but nihilism and what's the meaning? And you'd be doing them a huge disservice. You'd be almost evil to have children. And a lot of people believe that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really world damaging. In fact, I don't know if you ever read this book. It's called Merchants of Despair.
I haven't.
Oh, man, it's disturbing. Progressives that went through and forcefully sterilized people in third world countries.
Wow.
Millions of women sterilized without their knowledge or through force. Unbelievable. And they did it because they thought they were doing good, not because they were evil. They were evil, but they thought they were doing the world a vast favor by controlling the population. That's not true. Right. More of us means more connection to God, so long as we teach enough people as we can to really speak his voice and to get to know him. And then more humans is a really, really good thing. So long as we don't, we can keep up with the food and all that good stuff, right? and that was the scare, right? So, we were never going to figure out how to grow enough food for all these people, and then there's going to be mass suffering. And so we'd be better off forcing someone, there's that force. We'd be better off forcing someone, millions of people into and removing the choice of them being able, whether they could birth more humanity into the world. And we have no idea what we lost from that.
Mm-hmm.
Did we lose the next Newton? Einstein? Hawking? How many more of those types of people would have been born? Because even though a lot of the places that they were doing this were in countries with, well, you wouldn't expect that kind of person to be born into, human nature is such that we get those wild mutations, and that's God working his magic where you least expect him to. Again, it doesn't really matter which way you believe it, the biological way or the religious way. What did we lose? Because some people decided they knew better than God. Man, and when I think along those lines, man, that's really scary. And this message matters big time. Because I've always felt at my core, and didn't have a way to really express it, that, man, more people is supposed to be a good thing. And then we get all caught up and worried about, well, there's not enough room on the planet, there's, whatever. And we missed the basic message, which was go be fruitful and multiply. And you're going to get something good out of that, because innovation comes from stresses on the system. If we were a bunch of hamsters living on Earth, yes, God would be doing us a favor by sterilizing some of them. We're not a bunch of hamsters. We are the force that is able to craft the world. But we'll only, because we're lazy and sinful, we'll only do it when we really, really need to. Or enough of us really believe that we're doing good ahead of time because we have the message from God and Jesus. So believing in Christianity is, and this is what I finally came to the realization of, this is really like the ultimate good from my worldview. Okay, well, I'll stop talking there. And what do you think about all that? And maybe you can, well, I'll give you something to go off of if you don't have any real direction. Maybe, is there something in the Bible that comes to mind, or in your studying of Klein, or any of from your side?
Gosh, there's so much I could talk about. I'm all of a sudden paralyzed by the all the different choices that I have. But
yeah, no, analysis paralysis and 50 billion choices. What's the most significant? Well, the first one that pops to mind is the most significant. Well, God told you that one.
If you don't mind, I really got struck by something you were saying earlier, so I'll go back to that. And just the fear that really seems to be struck into atheists. When I look at almost every religion in the world, I don't understand why they would cause atheists to fear, because most of them are, in the classical sense, myth, where it's always true and it's never true. It happened nowhere and it happened everywhere. And in that sense, there's no real truth claim that most religions are making that would be problematic for an atheist. They may find it silly, or I don't know, childish or something like that, but I can see why Christianity would be a problem. And where I'm going is something that you and I discussed last week, which is that Christianity hangs its hat on history. We believe that God became a real human being that you could poke, and who could poke you back 2,000 years ago, and that he died on a real wooden cross that if you had run your finger along it, you'd have gotten a splinter. And that he really rose from the dead, all of this, 2,000 years ago. And if that didn't really happen, we're all a bunch of losers and you shouldn't listen to us. Really is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. I can see why making a claim like that would be very offensive to an atheist who also is dealing in the empirical.
Right.
But I mean, I'm really passionate about those things. I think that if Jesus really was not God, and if he really didn't do everything that Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John record that he did, I really can find some other things to do with my life.
Okay. So what do you mean by that? I mean, it has to be real in a sense of, can I leave you with just that and have you go?
Well,
and why does it make
I've never shaken your hand, but I believe that I'm talking to a real person.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, if Jesus was not also a real person, if he didn't really die on the cross. That was important because the Old Testament said, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." So Jesus had to die a death that was cursed and despised by the covenant that God had given Israel, because really it was us who should have been cursed because of Adam's sin, and then the sin that we pile on top of that. But the claim of the four gospels is that Jesus was taking our place and paying for the curse that we should have borne. If that's all a fairy tale, if sin isn't really my biggest problem, and if Jesus wasn't really solving that problem when he died on the cross,
okay, then I'm starting to see. Yeah,
I have some pleasures that I'd like to indulge in.
Yes. Why? What exactly? Yeah. So you better have faith. Why else would you skip all this great stuff you could be doing with your life as far as, what would we call it? Pleasurable nerve endings.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So it in order for you to be good with, I'm just going to try and restate what you just said to see if I'm following along. In order for you to be good with making the sacrifice and trying to live as Jesus would, because it's a hard job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's fighting our core nature in many ways. Then it better really have been real, and better really have been for the purpose as stated, or would you need even more than that?
No, I think you got it, because if sin isn't my ultimate problem, then I really don't have anything to be fighting against.
Right.
I can just go with the flow.
Right.
Now, I mean, I agree with you. If God is who he says he is in the Bible, then it makes sense that if we live the way he tells us to live, things are probably going to go better.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, right. I was just listening a week or two ago to Dave Smith, the comic, right. talk on YouTube with Owen. I can't remember his name, but he's also a comic. And anyway, two libertarians. For your listeners on YouTube, I'll just let them know that you and I met on a Tom Woods thing.
Yeah, that's right. We forgot to mention that. Yeah,
we have libertarianism in common. But anyway, two guys that I would expect to be saying, you know what, I'd like to sleep around as much as I possibly can in this life. And both of them, I was blown away. Both of them said, you know what,
I'm happy with my wife. That's all.
Well, yeah. Having one person who will love me no matter what is what's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds like a lot like the seventh commandment of not committing adultery.
Right.
Life just works better that way.
Yeah, it does.
Now, I think
definitely the way we're built, it does. That's right.
I actually think there's more theologically to it than that. But I'm trying to say that I agree with you that if we were to live that way, things would work better. I'm not saying that we could save ourselves, that we could just improve our own situation ultimately more and more. If that were the case, we wouldn't need Jesus. We could just keep obeying and improving and tweaking and dialing it in, and we'd get ourselves there. Thank you very much.
Right. With I think it's still, well, there's a reason why everybody's, I guess, faith is just a little bit different. We are all just a little bit different. No, that's interesting because you come from the faith and being plugged into it. I never, I grew up and I understood and heard the stories as in a disconnected way as you did. I'm sure I didn't go to church anywhere near as much as you did. I had my mother was agnostic. Her father was agnostic, and it was only my mom's mom who was a Methodist. Mm-hmm. So I would go to church every once in a while with her. And then my dad's parents were Christian, but never really talked about the faith much. And I never really asked. So I had to, I guess, put all this stuff together myself in a way. And the easy way to go about that is, oh well, all the old junk is junk, so I don't have to bother studying that. So okay, now we've carved out a huge swath of stuff I don't have to study. Let's go look at the scientific stuff. I'm learning that anyways. What can we build from that? But yeah, so this kind of brings me to this one point. Oh, and well, the point I want to make is, I think the one thing that I want to really get out of this, and if I make a great work or something like that, then it would be maybe a book or a series of videos or whatever that would deny what Stephen Jay Gould said. And he said that faith and science were what he referred to as non-overlapping magisteria. I mean, they occupied two completely separate realms, and neither one of them pushed or shoved on the other. I think that is dead wrong. And you can see it just in the well, that the atheists seem to want to crush every little bit of religion, and so that science can grow into its place. The problem with that is that, yeah, if you have a certain worldview, what are you going to do in your a posteriori scientific empirical methods of exploration? You're going to look for things that say, well, we better be the ultimate caretakers of the world, and I need to play this power game because I know more than you do.
Mm-hmm.
And so watch out for these certain views. And then it's all, well, let's just crush that one because it's bad and crush that one because it's bad. But at the same time, we have this phrase that says, what is it? Science progresses one funeral at a time, meaning that as the old school of science dies off, finally the new ways of thinking are accepted and come to be, and the new theories are rejected and stomped on by the old school. Just in the same way that religion or societal is more closely related, I guess, to societal beliefs than religion would change over time. Now, religion has some of that component too, but it's more resistant to change because it has, well, certain properties that remove them from us and say, this is the way it is. No, you can't mess with it. So you get things that are axiomatic and transcendent and even above philosophy. So what I'm getting at is I really believe that this is all tied together, and it's because of our perception of the world that is bound through the senses that God gave us, that we don't have any other way of examining the world that would reveal certain truths. And a lot of those, the truths that we were discovering before we had the scientific method would be somewhat akin to ancestral knowledge, and would become evident to us by going through the world as best we could. And so, well, what worked and what didn't? And this is what Dr. Peterson says, we watched for thousands of years what worked and what didn't. And what worked was if you behaved in a way such as that your father was always standing over your shoulder telling you what to do because that was the right thing. Now, that's a really simplistic view of that, but it's like, well, okay, well, why am I going to bother to, not take every pleasure for myself? Well, because dad's looking at me when you're 8. Or why am I not going to do it when I'm 35? Why wouldn't I just go sleep around with every woman that became available to me, especially peak sexual market value of guys is, if they're successful, is right around 30, 35. So why wouldn't I just go nuts and collect every 22-year-old hot gal that I could find? And because for a long time that did happen. They were called harems, and polygamy was quite common.
Mm-hmm.
But it resulted in chaos and a lot of pissed off, unhappy guys. So there's I guess the historical knowledge side of it. And so you could get to God from there. But I still think it's something more than that, because if you don't really have faith, then all that goes away, and then and it's constantly being torn down by the new generation, because we're born in a way that makes the new generation more open to change. Every young guy and gal seems to want to make their impression upon the world. They don't understand why the structures were there, and they have little appreciation for the things that they were born into. Wonderful air conditioning rooms with internet connections. That just happened, right?
Right.
So that's like the foundational layer. So how are we going to make that better without realizing, well, how do we keep, well, okay, before you go looking to tinker around, you better make sure the change you want to make isn't going to make the air conditioning and the building and go away and the knives come out. Something like that. And so we get that side of it, and I think that's why, as people, so you could think about it in one of two ways. You could think about it as, okay, well, this was a very practical thing, and it allowed us to continue to build great societies, especially Christian ones, that have become the most prosperous places in the world. And so that's a very practical view. Or you could see it as people were beginning to understand and know themselves more, they were able to more easily tap into the part of themselves that is divine and connected to God. The message of God became slowly available to us, written through men that had fine-tuned themselves to the word so much that they were able to create a archetypal story message from God. And then enough of those men existed over time to take the valuable pieces and put them together in a bound holy book, which we call the Bible, as the collective knowledge from God. So don't mess with it, because God's going to get pissed and he's going to slap you down and show you why that's important. So there's the mystical side of it. What do you think about all that?
I mean, yes, although I think that there's no way that if it was just a matter of human authors writing things and then those writings being collected over the period of at least 1,000 years or more,
if you're going back to the Genesis stories, those seem to have origins even from Mesopotamia, and they were then modified into.
Well, I mean, I take Moses as being the author of the first 5 books. And I mean, that would, anyway.
Well, if you want to point fingers and say blasphemer, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that what I'm trying to say is that
I just don't want you to be guarded in your speech. I want you to say what comes naturally. I know.
And this is what Klein got me so excited about.
Yeah. So what's Klein say about that?
Because it's all one fabric, in the sense of every story is revealing Christ, and not in a forced way. Right. I mean, in a really organic way.
Right.
There's got to be a divine author involved along the way that is superintending this writing process.
Right. Which sorry, you were mid thought, but I think that's, just to insert this, that's the complete opposite of what a postmodernist would believe, where every single solution works, right?
Exactly. And in postmodernism, there's no room for a meta-narrative. I mean, they eschew meta-narratives. I know Tom hates that word, but sorry, Tom. And I was just talking about this on episode 82 that's going to come out this Friday.
Okay.
One of the things that someone like Richard Rorty, or well, at least Richard Rorty would say, is that there's no one has a God's eye view.
Right. No, that's a really good way to put it. Yes.
And
only God does. Yeah.
There you go. You beat
right.
me to it.
Only
Carl.
God has the God's eye view. And
so,
yeah, we'll finish up.
Postmodernism keeps us.
Yeah.
Postmodernism keeps us humble in that we shouldn't think that we can climb up to have a God's eye view, but God has a God's eye view, and let's listen to Him.
And again, so the eye would come from my dual perspective. Then does it matter that whether God slowly revealed that message to us or whether we slowly grew worthy of it? Same thing. Still pretty much implies that there's something out there worth listening to, and it's way bigger than us.
Right.
And I was really struck over and over again as I would be waking up or in kind of a meditative state, and relaxing and just trying to think about whatever happened to come to mind, because I find that I'm able to do that more and more now as I've finally relaxed and stopped fighting these messages that I've seemed to have accumulated or am able to receive from God. The phrase God's time, you don't understand it. It's beyond you. But if God is eternal, He can see the whole snapshot at once.
Right.
In a way we would never, ever, ever be able to understand. The only way we might be able to understand it is because there's a little piece of God, I believe, in every single one of us. And through speaking the truth, through as many of us as possible, we're going to get closer and closer and closer to what God wants us to see. Thus, love your enemies, because they've got a piece too. You don't want to go purging the rest of the world because you're purging pieces of God, or at least His tools that He's using to try to wake you up to something. And that, was kind of one thing that I did want to dive into, but I don't think we were quite finished on where we were on the on God's time. If you
need to get to that at some point, though, that's tied in with what we talked about last week.
Yeah, I think that's it's uncanny how Morpheus matrix like this is, however you want to see it. When you start waking up to the message of God, it's everywhere, and you get a little piece as you move forward in time. And today, Sunday, I went to a Lutheran church, and I just happened to pick the one that was closest enough to the Methodist church. And I was like, we'll go see what this one's like. And sure enough, the message was love thy enemies. And man, that's hard. And how are you supposed to do that? And what's that all mean? And the pastor, I didn't like his answer so much, I guess. I mean, it wasn't anything new that I hadn't heard before, I suppose. We'll do it because that makes you like Jesus, and okay, that's what you're striving for. Okay, but why? What are we really trying to do with that? And and I think most of us can kind of get to the point where, okay, well, look, if we're acting like Jesus, then we are defusing this cycle of bitterness and revenge and hatred that lets us be able to have to shape the world with our words rather than surgically cutting out ourselves from it with guns and knives and swords, which is bad, and to put it mildly. And so if you're really able to love your enemy, then, you know, at least you can walk away and go, man, you just, you know, don't get it. But at the same time, you're like, well, okay, how big of an enemy is he? Is he going to, well, am I going to love him, and is he going to shove a knife in my heart? So where's the line? And that's a question I haven't quite answered yet, because there is a certain amount of corruption that can take over a human being that you must protect yourself from. And how do you do that? How do you love a person that's coming at you with a knife or wants to set off a nuclear device in your city?
Mm-hmm.
And that I don't understand yet. And I'm going to have to struggle with that one for a while.
By the way, I'm sorry that a Lutheran pastor did that to you. That's not what you're supposed to hear.
Oh, is that right? Well, what am I supposed to hear from well, I don't know. What's the Lutheran message?
Well,
as far as love your enemies, because you hear the agape thing and it's unconditional love.
Right.
And then I heard something similar from the Methodist pastor, who was, you don't earn love. We weren't talking about love the enemies, but it was, you don't earn love. It's something that's given freely and unconditionally.
Sure.
Which sounds right. So, well, tell me what your understanding is.
I mean, I would think a good Lutheran would say, we love our enemies because we're all born God's enemies, and he should have hated us and rejected us because we are his enemies. But instead, while we were his enemies,
I think that was there.
Son. Okay.
Yeah. I had probably done myself a disservice by not paying enough attention, but I was really going down my own road at that point. But yeah, so sorry to step on what you were saying, but is my understanding correct if I say that, yeah, because of we're all born sinners. That means we're all initially against God, and so God loves us anyways because he can see what we might become. That's my piece, that last one.
Right. He loves us because he loves us, and he sent his son to pay the debt that we owed. And that's
that ultimate forgiveness.
That's how he can stay just and extend that grace to us at the same time and in the same relationship, is that he satisfied his own justice by giving our punishment to his own son. So the way that ought to work itself out in our ethic is out of gratitude for what God has done for us. How can we withhold forgiveness from our enemies if God has forgiven us more than anyone could ever owe us? There's a parable in the Gospels called the parable of the unmerciful servant, where a servant owes.
Is that the one where he's forgiven by his Lord of a huge debt, and then he goes and beats the crap out of one of his own personal servants and throws him in jail and says, well, you're staying here until you can pay me back. And then the Lord, the original master, finds out about it and says, what's wrong with you? Right? Yeah.
Right. And in the parable, the first servant owes the Lord just an impossible amount. I mean, there's no way anyone could ever pay it back. And the second servant owes the servant like the equivalent of like $100. And so the point being, God has forgiven us far more than anyone else could ever be in our debt.
Right.
And it's so easy for us to forget that because our pride gets in the way. We get very offended by what people do to us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying unjustly. I'm just saying that, again, we don't have a God's eye view, and sometimes we pretend that we do.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit easier to see the difference between the God's eye view and God's time when we are talking about something smaller and simpler than, because eventually the Christian doctrine calls us to sacrifice our lives and do it willingly. And it feels like you could well, this is one reason why I think so many people get caught up in arguments, and certainly is my reason. You want to defend yourself because if you're arguing with someone and you concede, then you're giving up a piece of yourself that has to go away and sort of die. You lost that argument. You can't hold on to that truth anymore. Now, what does that mean? That means you've got to go back and examine all the things that you did that were based around that version of truth and go, that was wrong. And that one was wrong. And that one was wrong too. Oh, God, what did I do? And that's a lot of pain. And that can really hurt to do. And so people will argue themselves to death rather than admit that they're wrong. And so, but even that seems to be a little bit easier than to accept and see that we wouldn't be able to see what damage we would be doing by protecting our own egos or lying to keep from having to admit how we hurt someone. But it's like the world having to heal itself, or the network of humans having to reorganize around the falsehood that we tell. And then we're causing extra work. And if you think about us all connected together as like some kind of network or system, then lying is going to put stress on that system. And then the God's eye view would be able to see that stress because we all together have some sort of purpose that we're moving towards. And we make that purpose harder to come into being and manifest itself the more we drift away from the ideal of acting like Jesus. I think would be well, that's how I'm trying to understand it, in my puny way. Right. That's definitely not anywhere near it. And well, at any rate, it's still easier to see than, well, you lie, and well, that you can admit that you were wrong much more easily than you could give up your life or the life of someone that you loved, and not protect them. So when would we draw the distinction between, okay, well, it's time to recognize the corruption and evil within someone as being beyond, so I would have to use force to defend myself to keep myself from dying, but then I wouldn't want to take it so far as to remove this other person from the earth by killing them, because that would be wrong, even regardless of how much of my enemy they happen to be, because you're still supposed to love them. So there's got to be an answer for that out there somewhere, or some way to conceptualize it to beyond just faith. But that's definitely that's a tough one, and that may be one of those reasons for faith.
I think it's difficult to armchair quarterback this one. I mean, would there be circumstances in which you could defend yourself or a loved one? Sure. And I'm not saying that a Christian would be violating God's word by defending themselves or by defending a loved one, or even not even necessarily a loved one. Maybe their neighbor is being attacked and they're stepping in to help out there.
But you're still supposed to love that person that is committing the great evil against you, or the great harm, I guess might be the better way of putting it, by removing you or attempting to forever.
So, and I'm not saying that this is what everyone has to do in every situation. I'm just saying an option would be to simply place your body between the person who intends harm and the person you're trying to protect.
Right.
And just trying to plead with the person. Look, for the sake of your own conscience, so that someday you don't say, gosh, I wish I hadn't hurt that person. I wish I hadn't killed that person. Please don't do this. I'm just saying that that's an option of a way to handle it. I'm not prescribing that in every case that's how it has to go down.
Well, sure. And I think that's the discussion that needs to happen more often. Just talk about stuff like that, because, man, that is hard. And if we really are doing God's work, then we should be trying to find the way to the truth by articulating our best understanding of it as we can. And by doing that, that's why we're here, doing this little exchange. And so tackle the tough ones. So we got a little chat that popped up here. Let's see.
We have some interaction?
Yeah, a little bit. My friend Adam is on, and he's local to me.
Yes, it was Owen Benjamin. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, all right. And then let's see. So I'm sorry, Fallenaria. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. Jesus says, "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." Yeah, I find that's an interesting passage, because it's definitely one that gets twisted and taken out of context a lot when you just hear it in media and here and there, and it comes across as, doesn't the Bible say judge not lest you be judged? No, it means you better watch out when you start using judgment against people, because it's going to come right back at you, and people are going to use exactly what it says right there, that same measure against you. So how much sin have you managed to purge yourself of? Because watch out, you're going to have some things to answer for too. And God forgives us our sins, so how can we, quote, know more than God? And that's impossible, right? And withhold forgiveness and pass judgment. Well, this is my opinion. So we're supposed to love our enemies but hate their sins. Yeah, I've heard that before. Pray that the Lord will have mercy on them, for they know not what they do. Yeah, and I think that's true. And I've got some notes on what I just took it. I took it to the extreme case to see if we could how that would work out. With us just bouncing it back and forth, I'm going to go over what I wrote yesterday in a little bit. But we're supposed to love our enemies, but hate their sins. Pray that the Lord will have mercy on them, for they know not what they do. But God does not stop the consequences of our sins. Yeah, all right. The part that really stands out for me in that is, pray that the Lord will have mercy on them, for they know not what they do. That's right. They might be working through, the hand of God may actually be working through someone that is sinful, because God did not make a world without challenges and tests for us. And the people that are sinning are things that we have to learn how to overcome and deal with in the proper way, in order to get the most connection to God, something that would make us strong and able to overcome and worthy. And so, I've thought about this before, and this is how I when I get angry at my wife, I think about it this way. Well, God put us together for a reason. And one of those reasons is we really get under each other's skin. And if the person closest to me is getting under my skin and I can't forgive them, and I can't see why they would want to do that. Well, they want to do that because God sent her to me to help me be stronger and better so that then I could help her be stronger and better in return. Or if she figures it out first, then one of us is eventually going to figure out how to do that. If we both figure it out, then that's a message that we can speak and spread. Here's what happened to us. My husband and I, if she figures it out first, argued to death. And then we found the word of God and we learned to forgive each other. And this is the answer that we saw. Spread that message. Wow, how many people's lives did you just fix by having faith and truly believing what God is trying to tell you here? So I try to remember that as much as I can, because, and I have to be really good at remembering that in the time, because I'm pretty lizard-like sinful in my snap anger judgments, and it's very easy for me to get caught up in a yelling, screaming match. And if I can be at rest and be peaceful and then I can hear God better, and she'll see that, and she'll either, one of two things will happen. She'll come to a faster realization of what she's doing, because, well, I'm at peace and she's not getting anything out of it, right? We get so much out of it. It feels really good to yell and rage and scream at somebody when you're in the moment and you're not thinking about it. But then afterwards, you're like, oh, now I feel really crummy. Why couldn't I control myself? Then that's the question that always comes back to. Why couldn't I just control myself? And I think the more and closer connected you become to God, the easier that becomes, and the quicker you can get control over your sinful nature or your ancient lizard biology, which are one and the same thing as far as I'm concerned, then the less arguing and screaming you do, and the sooner you can come to a rational solution that actually works out. So, yeah, well, love your enemy, and especially love the person that just happens to be your enemy right now. Well, there's a good way to think about it. You're my enemy right now. What am I going to do to make that not true anymore? Well, I'm definitely not going to make it true by escalating.
Right.
And so I would have to have faith that somehow I can love you, who I absolutely hate right now, in order to make that happen. I'm not sure I can go any deeper than that, but something like that. Thoughts on that before I kind of dive into the... Well, that's a little bit about love your enemies.
Just that in my own experience, marriage has taught me what a rotten, horrible sinner I am.
Right?
I don't like those lessons, but I get taught those lessons all the time.
Wow. Valerina, that's really, I really hope I'm saying your name right. That's quite a thing to the conclusion to come to. That must have taken a lot of asking and praying to God. I've learned that I must serve 100% my husband and ignore my wants and issues, because that is what God asks of me. When I obey this, I am calm. And when I think of myself, I'm much more unhappy. Did you pray to receive that message? You can answer in your time. We'll move on for now. That's well, it's a little bit apropos to my condition right now, because I don't know if my wife will ever be able to come to that conclusion. And I don't know. And maybe that works for some people, and maybe it works for others. But I think definitely if you prayed for several months on it, wow, that's quite impressive. If you really asked for a path, and of course, as long as you're not in a situation where you're being harmed. But I've my personal experience is that I've had to take over the leadership role because I fell on my face several times. My wife had to pick me up, and then she has to have the faith that I'm still worthy of leading, and that's hard on her. And without faith, that's a really tough thing to do. But we've seen what happens when I have to depend on her, and we're both miserable as all get out, and we argue way more. I don't know what to make of that. I just know it's true for us. And so I'll share it with everybody because that's what you're supposed to do. I'm going to speak what's true for me. Misogynist or whatever, bring it on. I don't know. I don't care. Just that's what's true for me. So we'll see how that works out. So, well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think I hit on a lot of this already. Yeah, so I guess the underlying message for love your enemies is, for me, one, yeah, you can't see from God's view. You don't get the top down view. You can't see things through in God's time. God may be sending you things to test you, to sculpt you into something that you need to become. What are you going, if you look at every enemy that way, then what is that enemy going to teach you about yourself? The more you understand about yourself, I find the easier it is to talk to God. So it's something along those lines of, if you can find the openness. This is a term that Carl Rogers uses a lot. Becoming open as you understand yourself more. And you become open to concepts like, well, man, I was a really crummy little kid, and I beat the crap out of my brother all the time. And I was looking back on that, and I felt really bad on it. But now I look back on it, and I go, well, yeah, it was kind of a crummy thing to do, but that doesn't make me a bad person. And so I can let all that go, and now I feel a little bit better, and now I'm a bit more calm. Yeah, little things like that I think stack up. I think that was a really simplistic example, but it's that sort of thing. Yeah, but that was the main conclusion I think I came to, and I'm getting a little scatterbrained at this point because we've been going for a while. But yeah, everyone is a potential teacher, even in their hate. And they aren't coming at you to teach you anything, but they're possessed by whatever they're possessed by, hatred of you, an ideology, something that they believe that they're defending. And God has not been able to enter their heart and truly help them so that they're actually shining light instead of, well, potentially snuffing light out by, well, in an extreme case, killing somebody. But I guess it's our job to, if the light of the Lord is shining through us, then we use words to the greatest extent as possible, because our words are God, illuminating the darkness, making it very clear, and helping people accept truths they don't really want to. Because there's a lot of that going on in the world right now. People are rejecting stark, cold facts that don't fit in with their self-constructed worldview. And we're built in such a way that if enough of us around us become dark, then you get things like Well, the Gulag Archipelago and Stalin and people willingly ratting out their neighbors because that's the only way you can guarantee that you get to survive another week. You pointed out a dissident that wasn't a dissident. And so you lie and you make up some BS story so that you're not the one that has to go suffer.
Right.
And no one's willing to take it onto themselves. Here's something that I thought about. It's a little bit of a side from that. I was noticing this as I was reading some of the New Testament, and every once in a while, Jesus would come out and he'd come out and he'd preach and he'd teach and he would point out something really wrong and bad. And then he'd go hide, which seems weird. Okay, why is the Son of God going to run and hide? Well, because he's demonstrating for us what we're supposed to do. Why would you ever hide from evil? Well, you pointed out he never just runs away from it. He meets it head on, speaks truth, watches the enemy back off a bit, but then he'll see like bad juju coming in the distance, and he takes off. Well, this is the impression in my head from a very weak understanding of the Bible and having only read it a few times. But why would he do that? Well, because evil doesn't get to decide when good makes its ultimate sacrifice. My time has not yet come. Right? We hear that quite a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's all kind of roped together. And so if you are acting like Jesus to the best of your ability, then you're going to be very connected to God. God is going to tell you exactly when to make the ultimate sacrifice. Jesus knew when he was going to die.
Yep.
And he wasn't going to let it happen before then, because he knew in his heart and in his mind and in his soul when God wanted him to make his sacrifice. And when was he going to do it? When it saved us all. And evil doesn't get to decide that. God does.
Right.
So sometimes you got to run and hide so that you make your sacrifice at the right time. Well, I thought that was profound, but
yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't mean to deny that Jesus is an example for us, but there are some things that we simply can't do because we are not the eternal Son of God, and pay for everyone else's sins is one of those things. But
well, not to say that we can be like Jesus so that one of us would just save us all. But if we have a piece of God inside of us, and if our goal is to act in this manner, then the more closely we are aligned to what he did, the more good will come of it. And so, no, we're not going to save, one of us isn't going to save the world by making the perfect sacrifice at the exact right time. But maybe if you really understood your connection to God and said, no, I'm not going to fight this impossible fight here. I know which hill to die on. That will do the greatest good. Now, that's a tricky one because you could very easily use that as an excuse for cowardice.
Right.
And that's the danger, right? Because so many of these things skirt right on the edge of, oh no, I've got a really easy explanation for why I was running away, or why I didn't stand up to that person, or why I didn't speak the truth. Well, I wasn't going to die on that hill. Well, how do you know? You probably weren't going to die then anyways. There's only a few times when if I remember correctly, when he kind of takes off, and it's like, well, the Pharisees are coming, and he's going to get stoned right there.
Well, it's interesting that it's for two different reasons at different times. Sometimes it is because it's always because they want to take him by force.
Right.
But what do they want to do with him when they take him by force? Sometimes, yeah, they want to kill him. They want to take him out and stone him to death or something like that.
And then sometimes they want to, here, let's give you this question that's going to trip you up, and see, now we've got you, now we can throw you in jail, and or something like that, right? And now you're not the Son of God.
But there was also this messianic expectation. So there are times where they're wanting to take him by force and make him king. You're the one that's going to save us from the Romans.
That's right. That's right. There is that too.
And that's tied in with the temptation that the devil brought to him out in the wilderness, where, hey, look at all these kingdoms. I'll give all of this to you if you just bow down and worship me.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, that's not how I win. I win by losing on the cross. I win by dying. And he wasn't going to take that position of glory until he had died.
Yeah.
So
that's right. So yeah, I mean, you could go forever on that one. I think that's really, well, as I gain more experience and read more, it'll be interesting what links I'll be able to draw as the Bible becomes more, I guess, a part of my natural consciousness, and not just, what should we say, God pointing out things to me when they happen to come to me.
But those are exciting.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to feel you're on that path. Now, okay, so that's that'll lead me into one other thing, unless there's something you had a burning desire to talk about. I know I usually steal all the airtime. It was, well, one with this. Well, I didn't want to get into that. There was something else. Well, did we really tackle the whole? Okay, so we went through, and let's see, we're getting on about 2 hours here, but probably don't want to go too much longer. But how do you feel about the connection between love thy enemies and what we talked about in John 3:16? So I guess the quick rehash, if we could do that, I mean, because we went for a good while on that, was my understanding of good and evil through the message of John 3:16 and Jesus as, here's your reason to believe. Here's your ultimate truth against nihilism. Nihilism is the darkness of the world. Meaninglessness is the darkness of the world, and that is defined as the evil in men's hearts. And the reasons to do the things which are not expedient and are only pleasurable in the now, and make you look out just for yourself. They make you fail the marshmallow test every time, if you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
And they give you no reasons to sacrifice. Why sacrifice into a world of meaninglessness? And it's worded beautifully, and maybe sometime well, it's I put that up on my channel. It's leaving Leviticus episode 0 because it was unofficial, and I don't know if anybody will dig through it, but hey, it's there for posterity's sake, if nothing else. And then, like, one of the final messages at the end of that end of John 3 is acts that are wrought in God. And so those would be things that are eternal and are moving us as children of God towards his ultimate vision for us, which we don't really quite know. No one has a real idea of what heaven would be like. But here's what I think. Well, so if there's that connection, so, and then we connect that into love thy enemies, because, well, we can't really know what pieces are key, and maybe by these are puzzles that God's gonna throw at us over and over and over and over and over again until we finally get it and do it right this time. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in human nature and in religion that's very cyclical. And if you ever watch one of those shows like Groundhog Day, He, Bill Murray's character has to get the day just perfect, and so that he can finally stop being this nasty scumbag, stuck-up, arrogant reporter that has no chance of ever having any happiness. But he does the day just perfect, and he does it in a way that is just right. And then finally he wakes up out of the nightmare of the continuous loop of waking up at 6 a.m. to this horrible Sonny and Cher song and seeing the same events over and over. He actually gets so desperate, for those of you that don't know the movie, that he kills himself. And he goes
over and over
and over again. And every time he kills himself, he just wakes up at 6 a.m. in the morning again. And I think there's something that's a little bit, well, in the archetypal in the Carl Jung sense, in that kind of story. So, well, that may be in a sense how God is testing us, and we got to get it just right until we're worthy of moving forward. So that would be acts that are rotten God. And then loving thy enemies is going to be one of those things. Any thoughts on that? There's before I lose it, the connection to that was, damn it, I'll remember it later. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I let myself ramble instead of solidifying on it, but go ahead.
I think what Paul writes in the first part of Romans chapter 5 ties those two things together. What we were talking about last week in John 3 and love your enemies. Do you mind if I read it?
Go for it. Yeah, because I haven't touched anything past the Gospels at all.
Okay. So this is Romans chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, who has been given to us. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Right.
Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if, while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation.
Yeah, that was actually in one of my sermons yesterday. The coincidences are not coincidences. I'm not so sure anymore. It's something else. Yeah. If I wanted to logic that one out, and I always do because that's me and God made me that way, so I'm never going to give up doing that. So long as I believe, I think that's okay. And so I'm going to speak the word as best I see it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another conceptualization of the world. So, and I like this a lot. There's a little bit of God in every one of us, and so we're this massive spread out network that's each got its own piece of the puzzle to work on. Whatever it is that we're trying to solve, we don't know. And we're going to be called on to do the greatest possible good, whatever that means, each and every one of us. The more of us that do that job, the faster goodness comes into the world and the kingdom of heaven is created. And then we're going to be called on to make not only sacrifices during our lives, but the ultimate sacrifice of the knowledge that we're going to die, and how do you deal with that? And will there come a time when there's something that's worth dying for? And I know this is a bit rambly, but I'm just going to say it because it's, well, I think I find that I get closer to the truth when I ramble blab sometimes, so I'm going to do it. So there's something tied into that, into the circular nature, and if there's a little bit of God in us, then that means we're having to rebirth pieces of God over and over again. And there's, I don't know how to put it. The idea is too vague, but this got incepted in me from somewhere. But if you, well, think about it this way. God has come to us in many different forms, and we've conceptualized him in many different ways, whichever one you want to think about it, and through many different peoples that have lived on the earth. And I don't think that it was that that each message was pointless. So like the Mesopotamians had a myth of why we were all here and what the creation was all about, and of course the Romans we know, and the Greeks we know, and when we made this shift from polytheism into monotheism, and some sort of ability to unify the meaning of life, the purpose for it all. Each iteration of that is like God dying and being reborn, and each one of us dying is a little bit of God dying and being reborn, until we start to get closer and closer and closer to the message. And I thought of that because in that passage is the idea of, we're definitely not perfect. We're all still sinners. What would be the point of dying for a bunch of perfect people? We wouldn't have any goal to work towards. I don't know. Am I just totally rambling on that? I'm really not sure what I'm saying at this point.
Well, you mean what Paul's saying in Romans there, from what I just read?
Yeah, well, I was trying to draw some connection there. I sort of went off on my own path.
I mean, I think part of what he's getting at there is that it would have to be a pretty amazing individual that stands out from everyone else for us to say, you know what, take me instead of that person.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, none of us are that person to God. We're all enemies. If he were just, if he were fair, he should hate us. He should, throw us as far away from himself as he could. And yet, in spite of that, he loved us for reasons we may never understand, and he sent his son to die in our place, which makes what God did even more amazing than when we might possibly lay down our life for, I don't know, in our circles, maybe if there was some threat on Ron Paul's life. I'm really reaching here. And we said, you know what? I really respect that guy. Take me instead of him. And it's not even like that. It's that, I don't know, we're all Stalins to God or something. And he's saying, in spite of you all being Stalins, I'm still going to love you and pay for your sins and reconcile you to myself.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, here's when I reach conclusions like that, where I just don't quite understand what I'm trying to explain to myself, then I realize, well, God, you're trying to put God's message that is not perfectly crafted. You know, I don't believe that the Bible is a complete text or a perfect message from God, because if it was, then we could just follow the instructions and we could get it done. And so, but it's the best thing that we have, and it's the most close. It's the closest connection that we have to Him. And what did I write after? Here, let me read this. What cannot be achieved through logic by even the barest few can be achieved by all through faith. And I think what I meant by that was, if you really try to puzzle out everything that's in this book, you could spend your entire life and not understand it, and then not act on this world, and then you would fail to do anything productive. But if you took the messages on faith and tried to enact them just the best you can, instead of, I guess, sitting around trying to puzzle it all out, then you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and everyone can understand that the book through faith, where it's very, very difficult to understand logically in some ways. And we can logic ourselves into all kinds of really terrible things when we don't base our logic off of something that might require faith. What do I mean by that? That's, I'm probably saying a bunch of stuff that's just going to get myself in trouble. I don't know. Well, it seemed profound at the time. I don't know. Maybe that was just one of those side messages, but I think there was something there. It's something. There's a reason why our best understanding of how to behave in the world is in something that requires a lot of faith. And the Bible definitely requires a lot of faith of us. Or how do you feel about that? Or do you feel it's more of a logical document?
No. It definitely does require faith. There's no way around that one. But I also think at the exact same time that it doesn't require us to check our brains at the door.
Right. Yeah, and I definitely agree with that, because well, we've got the brains for a reason. Yeah. I think, well, maybe that's the first step to knocking down the non-overlapping magisteria, because you got to have faith, but the better you understand it, the easier it is for you to enact it. And the logical part of ourselves is what calls reason and science, and reduces suffering in the world by letting us build the things that give us comfort. And then we have to check this out. The more comfortable we make the world by sacrificing ourselves to this ideal, the more we need the faith to keep doing it, because we birth a new generation of people into extreme comfort and nihilism, where they don't have to work, where they don't have to struggle. So then you just have stuff provided for you. There's no reason to struggle. You can depend on a smaller and smaller set of people that are actually struggling and working hard. And eventually you end up with this big stacked up set of humans that are just nihilistic to their core, because they don't have any faith. How am I doing so far? I feel like I'm not articulating that very well.
I confess that I'm not completely getting it yet.
Yeah, let's see. It's something like, well, the cycle of generations. So you birth a generation of people into hard times. They look around and they go, wow, this is really crummy. I don't want to have kids into this. I'm going to do something that's going to change the world and make it a better place. The world becomes a better place. You birth a new generation of children into it. they're soft because they don't have anything to struggle against. And that's kind of like, well, we've seen that happen, especially after World War II. And then that soft generation ends up not having the respect for the things that the previous generation struggled for. And because of that, they don't maintain the infrastructure. They don't have a reverence for it. And things begin to fall apart because they're not doing the hard work that's required to maintain and build. And so if this lazy generation that would normally look around and go, well, stuff's pretty good here. I can play video games and watch porn and drink, and that's all I really care about. And they succumb to the nihilistic side. If they are, even when things are really good, if they're born into a very faithful society that says, well, I know you look around and you see all this stuff and you could do nothing. But God says, get out there, act in the world, and keep building it anyways. Then that's a cure for nihilism, and that keeps us from slipping backwards from a lazy generation that is born into a really nice, comfortable world and sees no reason to work for anything. Was that any better? Or because I've heard that idea a couple of times, but I hadn't really quite tied it to faith yet.
I see what you're saying. It sounds like the laziness or the thrift, however, whichever angle you want to take it from, is more in material terms, right? Either comfort or, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that.
Well, sorry. Well, let me not talk over you. Keep going.
I think that as we bring children into this world, the temptation will always be new and fresh and presenting itself in different ways all the time. Has God really said? Are you sure?
Mm-hmm. Why should I believe that? I mean, look at this. This is great. It's not. I guess it's not right to say that they're unappreciative. They want to enjoy the pleasures that have been granted for them without the appreciation of what it took to get there.
Okay.
And because of that, then there's no one doing the work that one would even maintain the things, and you get broken down amusement parks or whatever. And fewer people build because there are more people that are living in the moment. And then the next generation, those flaws are manifest in the world. The world is not as easy, or at least not as easy as it could be. Now, we've steadily progressed forward in spite of those things, but I think this is one of the things that begins to weigh down on us as generations go by, that it doesn't really have to work for much of anything except, well, enough for an internet connection and a small apartment. And if you can get those things, then you're pretty much set, and then you have to find your own meaning from there. And the more and more you're like, well, okay, I don't see anybody else working hard for this stuff. I see good stuff all around me. He's got something that I want, that I think I need, and well, that gets more into the whole, want for socialism and all that. And there's a reason why I think that. Well, one of the other things that drew me to Christianity was the emphasis on the individual. And you got to take the burden and the weight of the world on your own shoulders, because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what God wants you to do. That's what Jesus was trying to show you how to do. And so the message I really like the way Dr. Peterson puts it is, pick up your cross, struggle and carry it up the mountain. That's the thing that actually makes you happy, not all the stuff that you achieve or have or are born into. We're built in a way that requires us to have something to achieve, or a road to walk, or a path to go down. And we're not happy unless we're working towards some sort of goal. Every other way that we become happy without a goal is a distraction. It's watching TV, it's drinking, or clicking on social media, or playing video games. These are shortcuts in our brain that let us, quote, be happy, but that are ultimately unfulfilling. And I think it's really interesting, because a lot of Jesus's description of the kingdom of God, of the kingdom of heaven on earth, are not places that are perfect.
Mm-hmm.
But they are ways to continue acting that would make the most people happy. Something like that. And so that would mean, what does that mean? That means this vision of heaven with rooms in it where we would just be and be happy can't be right, unless God's going to change something fundamentally in our core nature. But then we wouldn't be human anymore. And so why go through all the struggle to give up what he created and make us something that we're not? It's a weird catch-22. I don't know. Were you following any of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So heaven can't be a static place of pure happiness, because we're not happy holding still. And in fact, I like this a lot. I think Dostoevsky said this, and I don't know in which book, but if we were given the perfect world, eventually humans would break it out of sheer boredom and spite of nothing to do. We wouldn't be happy at all. And that comes up in the Matrix too. The machines build the perfect world for us, and they have to tear down the old Matrix because the humans won't live in it, and they have to build a clone of 1999 or something like that. Forget. Yeah. So there's something really true about that. It's like we need something to struggle against, and I think that's so true. And then Christianity gives you something always to achieve for. It's almost like, here's Jesus. You're never going to be like him, but keep trying. And if you do, you'll be happy, even though you'll never get there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that if we do strive to be like Jesus, life will be more fulfilling than any alternative to that. And obviously, if we are being conformed to the image of the Son of God, that's going to please God. So, yeah, so it's a win-win.
Yeah, well, the rewards just keep on getting greater and greater, right? And a road without. So, yeah, does it ever say anywhere in the Bible through your reading, because you're far more familiar than I am, that the kingdom of heaven would be like a road that never ends, or anything similar to that?
Not that language.
Where does the static idea of heaven come from? I always grew up with believing that it was like some place that you would go to after you died as your ultimate reward, and that you would want for nothing. There would be no suffering, and you'd always be happy.
So those depictions really come from the last 2 chapters of the book of Revelation. That language that you just used, no more pain, no more, every tear will be wiped away, things like that. But when you take the total data of the New Testament, when it talks about the new heavens and the new earth, it's not just a place. It's this idea that God is going to transform the universe as we know it to fit this new mode of existence. And so it wouldn't just be it's true that Jesus uses the language of, my Father has, or I'm going to prepare a place for you, a place with many mansions and things like that. But I think we also get a window into what that mode of existence is going to be like when we see the way the Gospels describe Jesus in his resurrected state. So his disciples are huddling in an upper room with the doors locked because they're terrified that they're going to be hauled off next.
Oh, right.
And with the room sealed up tightly, Jesus appears with them. The text doesn't tell us how he got there. The point is that he's no longer limited in his resurrection body the way that we are in these bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And we get other glimpses into what life is like for him in his resurrected body. I think that's a model of what it's going to be like for us. We won't need spaceships to travel. We won't need airplanes and cars.
If that would be would you say that would be a more, was that all? Well, so Jesus appears in the room. Where in the Bible is that? Is that right? Is that in the Gospels or is that a Revelations thing?
No, it's in the Gospels. It would be towards the end because it would be after his death.
Right. And then in Revelations, does it speak more about, well, I know Revelations is such a wild book, but well, maybe we'll save that for after I've read it. But unless there's something you wanted to, well, I'll share this thought and then you can ponder it. And I think the more we do that and then let space in between go, and then we can have things like, oh, you said this thing a couple of weeks ago, and ideas will come to mind.
Sure.
So yeah, if Jesus is talking about having what, fear, did you say fear removed or pain removed, and okay, so I mean, what would that mean? That would mean, well, that would be some sort of transformation, right?
It would be better than taking us back to the situation of Adam and Eve before they disobeyed.
Oh, yeah, right.
It would be moving us beyond the probation that Adam and Eve were on,
right,
to realize what God had ultimately intended for human beings to be.
Right. Yeah. No. Okay. That's good perspective to keep drawing it back to the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Well, yeah. Well, no, I like that because, well, if we're looking at it from a biological standpoint, then the rising of consciousness would be Adam and Eve, and so that's us evolving out of animal form over billions of years. And then finally, well, okay, what do we do with this thing we call consciousness and this knowledge that we're going to die? And this place looks like it's a world of suffering and hurt. And why, God, would you build us into this place? Because honestly, it sucks, and I don't want to hurt. And I got to keep struggling. And man, God, you're kind of a rat bastard, and it's easy to see why people would be really angry at God with those kinds of thoughts. But then, yeah, is there another transformation coming then? And if we look at that as, I mean, this is again another one of my wild theories, but if we look at the emergent properties of the world and life coming into being as the best we understand it now, or at least my understanding of the science, is that, well, we keep on gaining more and more complexity, and through each stage we have to, well, we being anything that's alive, life had to overcome certain obstacles as the, well, I don't know, dominant forms of life fought for, God, I lack the language, because it's not the right way to think about it before consciousness. We always, as humans, we want to anthropomorphize and make things that with consciousness have consciousness, right? So like, that's why we have all these stories with talking animals and whatnot that would, and animals feeling pain in certain ways. But yeah, well, well, I'll leave that aside. So, well, the concept then would be that there was some sort of transformation from animal into Adam and Eve, and it took God in order for that to happen and make the first humans. And he gave us dominion over all of the rest of his creation, and then now it's up to us to become worthy of the next transformation, which would remove us of all the pain and suffering and things that we really hate about this world. But we can't just do that. We have to become worthy of it in some way.
See, I think that's the whole message of Christianity, is that in spite of us not being worthy, Jesus was worthy for us. And it's Jesus that actually is the new Adam, the ultimate Adam.
Okay.
Who earns all of this blessing for us. So all of this good stuff that we read about in terms of this transformation, we have because of what Jesus did for us. So, I mean, I know that you've just got oodles of free time. I say that tongue in cheek.
Oh, I don't want to keep you.
But what I was going to say is that I'm glad that you're reading through the Gospels. Maybe I'm getting a little bit better at self-promotion. It was really, really, really uncomfortable for me for a very long time. But maybe also reading The Tale of Two Adams would be interesting too, because I am working.
Definitely. Because I put our stuff inside of where I've got your book and all that. Okay. So yeah,
I'm really working with the meta narrative there that would it ties together everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I will. It's, oh my God, there's so many things I want to read, and I just give me the Matrix plug-in.
That's right.
Man, I know Kung Fu. Jeez, please, in my lifetime, let me see that. I don't know, what would that mean. I guess since we at one point mentioned the transhuman thing and the power that is coming into our hands as science gives us more and more power to shape and control the world. I mean, you've got to really have the people that understand the responsibility of what it means to be human, especially a human with a lot of power. And it's a wonder that we made it this far, because we could have just ended the whole damn thing any number of times over during the Cold War. And honestly, that threat's still here. We just don't think about it. That's a miracle of it itself, that we're not just all crippled in balls of fear. Yeah. Waiting for Armageddon to happen.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay, well, here's the thought that I think we'll close with, unless you wanted to tackle something else. It's almost 11. We seem to be keeping going longer and longer each time. So according to me and John, and my thinking on John 1:1, the number one job of a Christian is to tell the truth. And we want to promote that happening as much as possible. And you tell your understanding of the truth without veiling it in a message of what you think you want other people to hear, or what might get you in trouble, or the immediate suffering and pain that speaking the truth might present to you, and what you might have to struggle around. And my life has become increasingly better and incrementally better the more that I've done that. And so I really, truly believe that. I mean, that's the thing that I have faith in. And if you took all the other mysticism away, if you took the resurrection away and all this other stuff, I would still believe to my core that speaking the truth is the way to save mankind. And that's the message from God. So that's really, really central in my believing. But I think the rest of it comes with faith, and as I explore more, that message will be revealed to me, especially as I speak more and more truth. And I've kind of got some this versus that. So if you are a Christian and you're following this tenet of speaking the truth as much as possible, then that's virtue. But it leaves you open to being manipulated because you can't hide anything. But as you speak the truth, your own sense of truth becomes refined. I noticed as I started doing this and I became more in touch with myself, that people that were presenting kindness to me in a way that really wouldn't have been good for future Carl made me really angry. Really angry. And it would take me a while to really stop, and I'd get inside their heads and I'm like, why were they doing that? And I'll get specific on that some other time. But that's might be an interesting thing for you to ponder. So that's kind of okay. So you speak the truth more, then you become stronger in a way that is still difficult for me to articulate. And that provides the shield against manipulation. Because I feel we're all being somewhat manipulated right now by those who have power. And those who don't want the truth to come out because it's inconvenient for if we take it in a biblical sense, they're worshiping Satan right now so that they can have the power over the world and look at all these kingdoms. This is what you get for worshiping Satan. And he's the Lord of lies. All right. So, and I don't even know if that's a Dante's thing or if that's really in the Bible. And then, so Jesus is the shield because he's us speaking the truth that shines the light on all the lies. Okay. So that's the virtue side of being Christian. So the dark side would be the thing that we're really, why do we bother to do this? Well, because the other side is living by, have you ever read the 48 Laws of Power?
No.
So I would highly recommend you read it, because understanding truth means you have to understand the wickedness of what can blossom in our hearts. And I think that's why I took the time to listen to a reading of the Gulag Archipelago and all the horrible atrocities that happened in the Soviet Union. And I'm really enjoying reading Dostoevsky because he explores these questions very well. So, all right. So the opposite side of virtue in Christianity would be the 48 Laws of Power, nihilism, and then you lose your truth detector because you're not speaking the truth, so you don't know what the hell the truth is, and so there's something natural in you that is not connecting you to God, so you can't find the logos, which is God's word, and then you have no problem using and manipulating others. And the people that you can use and manipulate the easiest are all those other people that are corrupt as well. Because what happens in the Gulag Archipelago is the people that understand what's right and really know it and have faith in that say, no, you're wrong. And it stops the corruption right there with them. And so that's us through our understanding of what's good and right through Jesus really saving the world. But here's the way the main idea I wanted to have you ponder, and I wanted to ponder, is so Have you ever read Andrew Carnegie's it's How to Win Friends and Influence People?
Oh, no, I've heard of that one, but I haven't read it.
I finally took the time to read it. It's a great audio book. That's a good one to listen to on your drive. And that's sort of like, I thought of it this way. I know I kind of, they are in the same spatial time frame. I listened to that and 48 Laws of Power at the same time, but it was like, How to Win Friends and Influence People is sort of the Christian way to be kind and good to people in their own best interest, and still kind of, and have your cake and eat it too, of relationships. And whereas 48 Laws of Power is how to manipulate and do the worst evil possible to gain whatever you need for yourself. And so they seemed like the light and dark of our relationships with other people. So I'm kind of exploring that with the biblical perspective in mind. So, and then the last thing was, let me read this because I forgot what I wrote. Okay, so the lie that gets sold to us as truth is we're being kind to you out of interest of humanity, or out of interest of being kind to this group of people. And we're doing that out of a unwillingness to listen to God, because his messages spans through time and cares more about people in the future than it does right now. At least that's what I believe from my understanding of God. And so you get this cloak of kindness, which is actually a very evil and terrible thing that takes too long for most humans to catch on to. And it takes a really well-oriented moral person to speak out against it and to halt that kind of corruption that's masked as short-term kindness. It's like giving unfortunately, a lot of our government programs are like that, because eventually that's going to blow up in our face and they're unsustainable, right? Or in a more concrete example would be, well, I can end the heroin addict's suffering by giving him more heroin. But that's not kindness to the heroin addict 6 months from now. That means he's going to die.
Right. You're not ending the pain and suffering. You're just postponing.
You're exactly. And alcoholism, all those temporary fixes that remove suffering and don't provide an answer. So the idea was this two sides of the coin of good versus evil, and with the evil being nihilism and lies and manipulation, the good being virtue and a refined sense of truth and speaking the truth and getting strength through truth. So because of the dark side of the world, and it's really within every human heart, you've got to use logos really, really well and understand logic just as well as you can, so that you can speak the truth as best you can. And the more people do that, the less corrupt messages get spread around the world, and the better life becomes for everybody moving forward through the future, instead of just right now and us delaying the pain of what we're going to have to go through in, well, a lot of the world, because we've spent ourselves into a huge debt bucket. And things like that. All these kindness messages that are, well, these evil messages that are wrapped in a ball of kindness, and so that they're easy to digest.
So let me try to summarize now and see if I've understood what you're saying.
Yeah, that was my best attempt at articulating it for the first time, so go for it.
If someone's got cancer, it's best to give them the diagnosis straight up, 100 proof, no ice.
You need to start dealing with that right now.
Yeah. Rather than to say, let's change your diet a little bit. And
that's a very good concrete example. Yeah. So yeah, here's some things that you might want to start thinking about doing, but we're not going to tell you why. And that was true in my relationship with my wife and my kids. The more I would lie and deceive to put off a fight or something like that, because I didn't want to deal with that right now, and then I wouldn't want to explain myself and then have to get into a big argument. The worse the eventually argument that I was going to have to tackle later. And cancer is a really good way to put it, because what's your greatest chance of getting over cancer without it consuming and killing you? It's facing it as soon as possible and speaking the truth about it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I like that. That's a really good concrete example of.
You need a doctor who's willing to give you the diagnosis as soon as possible.
What good is a doctor that doesn't speak the truth?
Right.
Yeah. And so if we're all at least responsible for our connections to humanity around us, and as we become more connected to the world via technology, it's going to become more and more vital to speak the truth regardless of immediate consequences, or else this game is going to end very poorly. And I believe that really deeply now. And as I've awoken to God, that's given me faith and strength to be able to deal with, well, the consequences of saying some things that people aren't going to want to hear.
Mm.
And the things that get, well, I don't know enough about Alex Jones, but apparently he got banned off of every single social media thing today, which is fairly frightening. And I find it very ironic, sorry, this was just popped in my head, that the Washington Post's front page slogan is "Democracy dies in darkness." I don't know how many Washington Post articles you read, but I find that a lot of them are very far removed from the truth.
Right.
Or at least my version of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea being that you shine light on the corruption, just like Christianity tells us we're supposed to do, and that makes the corruption able to be fixed. But when your news organizations are not shining light anymore, it's a problem.
Right.
That's a real problem. So it's up to us. And thank God for the internet evolving the way it is. And then I can get into my theories of the more disconnected and small the structures are, and have the more connections they have, rather than being big and overbearing, the more efficient and less dangerous they are. Because if one piece of it fails, not a big deal. And corruption can't easily spread through a distributed system with lots of connections. And that's what the internet is. It's bringing us individuals more connected. But the danger is that there's some really big gatekeepers right now that seem very corrupt.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I think that we're going to have to tackle by really, it's going to require some sacrifices. And if you're not a Christian, I don't know how you're going to reason yourself into that, because that's going to take some faith and some pain and sacrifice. Because you could get your ability to monetize yourself over the internet via the kindness of everybody else removed from you like that.
Mm.
When guys like Patreon decide they don't like Lauren Southern. That happened last year. I don't know if you know that one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm getting all political and stuff, but that's sort of one of my reasons for believing. So, and why I think it's really good for me. So I dig further.
Very good. Well, shall we?
Yeah, I think we better before I get on another rant. Jesus. Well, as always, so good to talk to you, my friend. And for those of you that did join us today, I really appreciate it. We may trim the show down if it catches on, and I don't know, see what spins and spawns off of it. But right now, I think just you and me talking is a good model to demonstrate to everybody else, because I think we try to be as truthful as we can with each other. And just because we happen to be talking about the significance of biblical stories doesn't mean that other people can't get the message that it's just go out there and speak the truth, the best truth that you understand. And if you really want to do the right thing, consequences be damned, because it depends on you and me. And I'm ready to bear my cross, I suppose. Sorry, I'm patting myself on my back too much. Sorry, Jesus, that's the sin. I shouldn't do that. But someone's got to stand up. I hope other people stand up with us.
Definitely.
All right. Well, God bless you on the rest of your journey this week. I hope it's not as exhausting as your weekend sounded like it was.
Well, I hope you have a great week too.
Oh, that's Ben's wife. Okay, so I didn't realize that. Wow. Hey, yeah, guys, thanks for hanging out. Flampy one. And God, tell me your name again. I forget. Well, maybe you don't want me to broadcast it, but yeah. So a couple of good friends of mine. I don't think I've never met Ben's wife in real life, but they've been. Ben's always been a good ear, and I've always appreciated that. So thank God for him.
Those are nice to have.
Mandy, thank you. Yeah, he told me your name and I forgot. I apologize. Well, I hope you guys you liked it. I'm glad you hung out with us. I really appreciate it. We'll see what we can make from this. Share it around. And Chris, and so at some point, I think we should talk about, well, what if this does blow up, and how do we want to handle that, or how do we want to best grow it? And if, because I don't want anything to. Well, the main message of this is to be useful for us, be an example for other people, and if money comes from it, well, then good. But we should talk about, well, the what ifs. So maybe we should do that offline at some point, because well, there's nothing worse than assuming one thing and then finding out you were very wrong, and that's the kind of thing that breaks friendships, and I don't want anything to ever break our friendship.
Right. Yeah, me too. Me neither.
All right, sorry to get heavy on that, but hey, heavy things are worth talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we'll call it, and I'll shut up.
All right, Carl. It was good talking to you.
Yeah, good talking to you too, Chris. I will look forward to next week. And good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.